Which witch is which, and which witch are you? So, if you've ever wondered about the different types of witchcraft or the different types of witches, you are all in luck because tonight's episode is all about types of witchcraft. So, from green witches to cosmic witches to sea witches and everything in between, we're going to be talking about the types of different witches in tonight's episode. So, Merry Meet, I am Aislin. This is Ask Aislin. Welcome to those who are joining me. So, if you're here with me live, you can leave questions and comments in the chat, which I will answer at the end in the Q&A. And if you like what you are hearing at any point during the video, leave a heart or a thumbs up. It just helps us make sure this gets to more feeds. And also, if you're watching this back later in YouTube, make sure that you like or you follow our channel, Body Mind Witchcraft, so you won't miss any future episodes. All right, so I'm going to dive right in and I'm going to start talking about different types of witchcraft. And so, the reason that I decided to do this episode tonight is over the years, there have been many people who've come to me and they'll ask me questions about what type of witch am I? What type of witch should I be? How do I figure out what type of witch I am? And so I usually respond to anyone who asks me that question. I usually respond with another question. Is there a particular reason that you want to know? Because that's something really to think about. Why are you exploring that idea in the first place? So I ask this mainly because when I began studying witchcraft, and this was in the mid to late 90s, it was not something that a lot of people talked about. So what I want to say here too is before I even begin anything is you don't necessarily have to label yourself with anything. You know, when I came to my path in, like I said, the mid to late 90s, I don't really remember there being as much talk about the types of witchcraft. So there was a lot of talk about whether someone was a pagan or they considered themselves a witch or Wiccan. We had several druids in our friend group. I knew a couple people who were Dianic, but that was about the conversation that we had about what types of witch or witchcraft people were practicing. Now, it wasn't until years later when I started my own coven about 10 to 15 years ago that I started to notice there were more people asking this question. It always made me wonder why that was. And I think a lot of it has to do with our desire within the collective to kind of understand who we are. If you notice, it's pretty hard to resist online quizzes, right? Because we want to learn more about ourselves. And this in society's desire to label people and people to label themselves. It's a way to identify with each other and identify with ourselves. So I definitely understand the need to figure out this. And so I'm going to be starting this discussion today with this idea, though, to let you know that it's okay to not fit into any of these categories and to not even worry about this concept at all. But if you are interested in the other types of witchcraft or types of witchcraft, that's what we're talking about tonight. All right, so I'm going to start talking about several different categories that a witch might fall into. And as I go through these, see if any of these resonate with you. And saying hi to those who are joining. I see Carla says she's late. You're right on time, Carla. We're just starting, so don't worry about that. Okay, so let me expand these comments for a minute. Okay, hi Misty, Elizabeth. Hi everybody. Good to see people who are joining on. Okay, so I'm going to start with actually a question so that we do have a Q&A at the end, but Jenny sent us a question that is all about this episode. So I'm going to start the episode off by answering Jenny's question. So she said a question that she gets asked a lot is what's the difference between a green witch, a hedge witch, and a kitchen witch? And this is something I hear a lot as well because there are many similarities between these three different types of witchcraft. And so let's dive in and kind of see how they're similar, but then how they would be different as well. So I'm going to start with the green witch. The green witch is a very popular category, and I'll share my thoughts on why I think that is. Many witches that come to the path have come here because they have a great reverence for nature, and that their witchcraft, for that reason, tends to be very nature based. Now, the green witch takes that to another level. So, if a person considers themselves a green witch, they're really concentrating their magic, their spellcraft, their rituals around things that are going on in the natural world. Now, generally, that's flora, which means plants, but it could also be animals. So, green witches are going to tend to be fairly close to animal spirits as well. Now, usually a green witch will be quite well versed in herbalism, or at least very interested in studying herbalism. And many green witches prefer to do their rituals and their spell work outside in nature, which makes sense, out in gardens, out in the woods, out in any natural setting, and probably would prefer that to being indoors. Now, in general, their practices are very earth centered, like I said, and the focus really is on that interdependence of all things in nature. So, that idea that all things are connected, and any little thing that happens out in nature, out in the world, is going to have reverberations and affect all other things. Now, many green witches might also refer to themselves as garden witches, especially if they keep a garden on their property. And sometimes they might call themselves a nature witch as well. That would all kind of fall into that same category. They tend to put special focus on working with the elements as well, and those elemental energies that are part of nature, and may be environmental activists. So I think Starhawk is a very good example. She, from the very beginning, she has been into nature. She has a book called The Earth Path that goes through how to connect to the earth as a witch. She has a permaculture class that she's teaching right now. So she's a perfect example, I would say, of a green witch. Though she herself might consider herself other types of practicing other types of witchcraft as well. But those who are green will tend to have more sustainable practices in their own magical practice, and feel that they are deriving their power from nature. Their rituals and spells will tend to be in season, so really following the wheel of the year, understanding when is the best time for certain types of spell work, because that's what resonates with the natural setting that they're in. Now, the hedge witch is sometimes confused with the green witch because there are many similarities. The hedge witch will also find herself, himself, themselves closer to nature. The hedge witch, though, works on the hedge, and I'm going to explain in a minute what that means, but really it's a line, it's a space between the spiritual and the material worlds. This is like the liminal spaces. So these types of witches may be attracted to power spots on earth that mark places where the veils are very thin. So temples, cemeteries and graveyards, crossroads, deep in the forest, things like that. Now, a hedge witch tends to be more of a solitary witch. That it doesn't mean that they have to be, but they might tend to be more solitary. And their magic is centered around the hearth and the home in many cases. So the home itself has this sacred space to it, which we're also going to see in the kitchen witch in just a moment. Usually, the hedge witch will practice herbalism like a green witch would. Not necessarily, but often kind of leans that way, and may have jars and jars of herbs, often harvested themselves. The hedge witch may also be interested in the spirits and the ancestors of the land that they live on and work with them in rituals. So, the spirits and ancestors of the land are not necessarily the spirits and ancestors of birth. For example, where I live here in Southern California, this is a land that was peopled by different people than my ancestry. So a hedge witch would be very interested in studying the culture and the people who lived there before, and working with those actual spirits of that land that they're on. Now, a hedge witch is often shamanistic, seeks an inner transformation in their work, and will sometimes ride the hedge, they say. So this is entering an altered state of consciousness that makes it easier to pass between the veils. So a while back I did a video on altered states of consciousness. So these are ways that a person can get into them. It can be through breath work, it can be through meditation, sometimes it'll be through herbal tinctures or different drugs or things like that. So a hedge witch might use an herbal tincture or some kind of an herbal medicine that will allow them to pass between those veils a little bit easier. And then what they can do is go into those spaces, receive messages from the ancestors of the land, perhaps, or from their own ancestors, or from their guides, or things like that. So, like the green witch, the hedge witch is also usually tied to the seasons of the wheel and the wheel of the year, maybe more so than, say, I'm trying to think of a different one. We'll see some later on. Maybe like the sea witch might not be as concerned with the cycles of nature as a hedge witch or a green witch might be. Now, the kitchen witch is also very connected to the hearth and the home, but especially the kitchen. This witch concentrates on magic in the home that is and sees a spirituality within the kitchen. So, to the kitchen witch, all of the utensils in the kitchen can be considered the tools of the craft. So your knives are your athames, right? So your spoons are like wands. The kitchen witch is also will cook with intention. This is a big part of it. So they see that the foods that we eat can be infused with intentions that can change the outside world. So these foods might be infused with intentions of love or prosperity and abundance, or perhaps peace or transformation or things like that. And so for them, stirring, and while they're preparing the food, perhaps stirring diasil or clockwise would infuse the food, bring in things, good things that they wanted the people who are going to eat it later and they themselves to take into their bodies. And then they might stir widdershins or counterclockwise if they're trying to banish things or release things that that they don't want there anymore. Now, usually the kitchen witchery is considered more of a practical approach to the craft, and we'll see a few types of witchcraft later that are not considered quite as practical. So by that, really what we're meaning is, using the things here that are in front of us, same with the green witch, using the herbs and the parts of things that they find in earth, connecting to the earth. These are just going to be considered much more practical forms of witchcraft than say like the cosmic witch, which we're going to talk about later. Kitchen witches will often have tinctures and potions, elixirs. One of my friends considers herself a kitchen witch, and she's always making all kinds of elixirs and tinctures and potions and things for herself and giving them away to others. The kitchen witch is also great at bringing magic into the everyday world. So that would be our differentiation between the green witch, hedge witch, and kitchen witch. And what I would say is that it's possible to be all three. And you're going to find later too, it's possible to be any of these. It's not like you have to put yourself into one box and stay there. Okay, and it's also possible to be none of these. Okay, so just saying hi to everybody. Hi, Jen and Cindy have joined us, and Melinda. Hi, guys. So anybody who's here live, feel free to leave questions, comments in the chat. And it doesn't have to be about types of witchcraft. It could be about anything. Okay, so let's then move on to the traditional witch. Now, the traditional witch, it kind of depends on who you're talking to. We have two different definitions of this type of witchcraft. So on one hand, the traditional witch might be thought of as a person who was initiated perhaps into a specific lineage or tradition. This tradition will have specific liturgy. This is the words that are used during the ritual. They may have specific practices, specific ways to set up an altar. And so an example of this would be like the Blue Star tradition or reclaiming. So people who are in those traditions might consider themselves a traditional witch. That would be one definition of traditional witch. But sometimes traditional witch is defined as being lineage that is handed down to that person through the family. So in this case, these practices, they might include like pre-Christian or pre-Abrahamic religion practices. They might have folk magic or folk practices involved. There could be pagan practices as well. And what I will say is that when we're looking at the traditional witch from that perspective, that person may also then consider themselves to be a hereditary witch. Now, a hereditary witch is someone who was raised by witches or learned the craft from relatives or close family members. So if you look back, so anybody who is in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you may not know a lot of people who were hereditary witches. Mainly, I'm going to have some speculation on why this is. A part of it could be that people just keep it very secret, especially anybody who was raised in the 60s, 70s, and 80s may be keeping, maybe keeping the path secret. What I think that is more and more people are finding the pagan path. They're choosing to raise their children openly in the pagan path. And so we find more, I believe we're going to find more hereditary witches as we proceed. Many of the people that I know who are my age who have had children are raising their kids to be pagans. And so those kids may pass that on to their children as well. Now, the hereditary witch will usually have a very deep connection to their ancestors because their witchcraft was passed down, through the lineage. And they may know a lot about their family history or genealogy, or if they don't, they may become very interested in that and learning how things were passed down. A lot of it would be orally, probably. So that would be a hereditary witch who might sometimes consider themselves traditional, but traditional can also include those who were initiated into a specific tradition. Okay, so let's talk about the secular witch, who's a little bit different. The secular witch really doesn't bring in the spiritual or the religious beliefs into their practice. So what this looks like is there's not really going to be much work with deities, and there probably isn't going to be much work with spirits either, and they may choose not to work with the elements either, or any of those elemental energies. Now, the magic of this type of witchcraft is thought of is not so much a tool for spiritual enlightenment, which we see in some of the other practices or some of the other types of witchcraft, but it's more of a tool for manifestation. So this would be considered a very practical form of witchcraft. You're doing the craft in order to create an event or an intention that you want to see in the world, but that is divorced from kind of the spiritual or religious part of it. Usually a secular witch is solitary because they probably wouldn't be seeking out covens per se, but they might attend pagan festivals and enjoy spending time with other pagans. One of the beautiful parts about paganism that I've found over the years is regardless of the different labels that we use for each other, we all come together because we're all pagans or we're all witches. And so anybody's ever had a chance to go to a pagan pride day near you, or if you haven't had a chance and you see one coming up, I highly recommend it, because just a space to go and see all these people, and while they have different viewpoints and different approaches to the craft, we all have that same thing that we share as being witches and being pagans. So that would be the secular witch, so divorced from that more religious aspect of the craft or spiritual aspect of the craft. Now, there also is the sea witch. A lot of witches really enjoy the ocean and water energy. And so the sea witch is a very popular path for some to take. So these witches will work with the energy of the ocean. Those who don't live by the ocean may still draw that energy into their rituals through bringing in seashells or sand or symbols or things that have come from the ocean. A sea witch also might work with other water, the water element just in general. Now, they may actually perform rituals at the ocean or a body of water. So I don't consider myself a sea witch, but I perform my full moon ritual. I perform it every single month at the ocean, right up at the edge of the ocean. And I think there's only like one time I've missed it in years and years, and I've gone there every time. So while I wouldn't really consider myself falling into this category, I definitely relate to this type of witchcraft and bring a lot of this into my own practice. So these types of witches and this type of magic is often very fluid and intuitive. So it may not be as like ceremonial or as practical as some other types of witchcraft. The The sea witch or the water witch also very much connects to the sacral chakra. And the sacral chakra is our second chakra. It's located a few inches below the navel, and it's ruled by the element of water. So this is a energy center of the body that when we have it dialed in and we're working with it, it brings in that fluidity and that ability to have intuition. Intuition is one of those things that, really it comes online, and it's more pronounced when we're able to go with the flow. So a sea witch might very much tap into the sacral chakra in order to tap into that more fluid or flowing state that then will resonate into their magic. And then they may also work with like the emotional states in their magic, and may also work with the subconscious mind. So I follow this with the moon witch because the moon witch has some connections to the sea witch or the water witch because of that connection to intuition. So this type of witch will work with the phases of the moon and lives in attunement with the lunar cycles. So what this usually means is that they're going to be the person who's always going to be able to tell you when what phase of the moon it is. So I consider myself, I'm not sure if I would consider myself a lunar witch, again, because I don't really have a label that I put on myself, but I very much relate to this type of witchcraft. I think that following the moon cycles has very much helped me in my craft. Now, usually the lunar witch will also work with the subconscious mind, intuition, tapping into feminine energy regardless of their gender. They tend to practice a more intuitive and emotional style of magic, very similar to the sea witch, which is why they share some things in common. So that would be the sea witch or sorry, the lunar witch. Now, the lunar witch may also consider themselves to be a cosmic witch. Now, the cosmic witch will work with not just the energies of the moon or those lunar energies, but it's going to work with the energies of the cosmos. So this means stars, planets, and galaxies. This person is usually well versed in astrology, or they're at least very, very much interested in astrology, and often astronomy as well. So very, very the person who's got the telescope and is staring up at the stars, or wanted to be the astronaut when they were a little kid, right? So this person will usually time their spells and their rituals to the movement of the celestial bodies, not just the moon. So looking at when certain planets are in retrograde, or seeking when certain planets are transiting through their astrological chart, for example, and then they might do a ritual for that. They might also be very tapped into the energy of the days of the week, because those days of the week are ruled by different planetary energies. These people are often seen as more philosophical and intellectual. So we had some of those forms we said that were more practical, and then we had forms that we said were more kind of intuitive and emotional. And this form is going to be more intellectual, philosophical. I would think about anybody who's a Harry Potter fan. These are the Ravenclaws, essentially. So these people kind of stress that interconnectivity with the cosmos, being aware like of the macrocosm and us as being the microcosm within it. Um, and so if I had to pick one type, let's say you had to pick one, I'd probably pick that form because I fit all those categories. But at the same time, I do a lot of water work, and I also do a lot of lunar work. And some green witchcraft too. So there are so many different types of witchcraft that we could talk about, and pretty much for any kind of interest that you might have on the pathway of your, developing yourself as a witch, you probably could find a form of witchcraft that someone has written about that's connected to that interest that you have. So there's swamp witches that people will write about: fire witch, storm witch, chaos witch, elemental witch, crystal witch, fairy witch, divination witch. So, pretty much there's a label that you could use for any interest that you could connect to. And so what that brings me to then is a kind of a final category for tonight, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what I would do with this afterwards. But there's also the eclectic witch. Now, I want to clear up a few misconceptions about the eclectic witch. The eclectic witch pulls from witchcraft from pulls into their practice from different types of witchcraft. So as you heard me talking, I would mostly probably fall into this category because I told you I pull from green witchcraft, I pull from sea witchcraft, I pull from lunar and cosmic witchcraft. So these people will usually have several sources or several traditions that they're pulling from. This type of witchcraft really emphasizes the power of experimentation, the power of uniqueness, like creating a path that is very unique to your own. And these witches are usually considered quite adaptable, and it's a very imaginative form of magic because it can bring in anything that you want. Now, what I do want to clear up a misconception of is this does not mean that an eclectic witch is chaotic. So we've actually had people who've come to our coven. So our coven is considered a traditional eclectic coven. And people have come to it and have said that they thought it would be something different. They thought it would be more chaotic or that anybody would be in charge at any times. And so we are actually traditional in that we have like our own set of liturgy and we have our own way of practicing and setting up an altar and but at the same time we're eclectic because we will draw on practices from all different places and we will also call upon deities of different pantheons that we have been working with or studying. So I just wanted to explain a bit of that because sometimes there's this misconception that eclectic is just chaotic and the people don't know what they're doing. And actually, and it could be true, there could be people like that. But I can speak from my own experience and of all these people that I've initiated into our coven, it does not have to be a chaotic form of the craft at all. So after listening, to all these different types of witchcraft, which witch are you is a question to be asking. One of the most important things I think for anybody is really follow your passions and your interests. It's the beauty of this path. It's not like some of the other religions where you decide to become a Christian and you are going to get confirmed in a particular type of Christian sect and you're going to follow the rules there or something like that. It's not like that. This is you finding your passions, finding your interests. You don't have to have a label, like I've said a couple times. You definitely don't have to have a label. If you are newer to the craft, you might be wondering where to even begin. That's a question that I get from a lot of people. And so what I always say is ask yourself, what drew you to the craft in the first place? And start there because there are a lot of books out there and it can be really overwhelming. And I've seen people kind of come in the beginning to me and they'll be like, I want to learn everything. And it's like you can't learn everything all at once. You got to have some patience in this. And my best advice to people is to kind of start with what drew you here. So if you got drawn here through herbalism, start there. Begin to look into like green witchcraft, herbal witchcraft, things like that. If you got drawn in here because you're really interested in tarot and divination and crystals and things like that, study that, right? And start to carve out your own path. And as you go, that path will open up and it's going to show you different other paths to take. And one thing will lead to another thing, which will lead to another thing as you carve out your own path. So that's what I would say for those who are new. And also, always remember labels are never necessary. But as a newer witch, they can guide us and they can inform us of the different possibilities that we could choose if we resonate with any of those. Now, for those of us who've been on this path for a while, it's fun sometimes just to think about the different types of witchcraft and kind of it's which one do we fall into. So that is the types of witchcraft. I'm going to go into the comments and the chat now. And I have about like 6 questions that were sent to me as well. So I'm going to answer those. But anybody who's here, feel free to put anything in the chat. And it doesn't have to relate to types of witchcraft. It can be anything at all. Okay, so I'm just going to go, I'm going to start with the people in the chat and then I'm going to go to the questions that were sent to me. Okay, so Angela asked about an agnostic witch. Yes, so the agnostic witch would probably fall into the category of the secular witch. So that would just be a witch who is not connected to the religious or the more spiritual aspect of it. So yeah, that would be secular witchcraft. And then there's many people who practice that. Elizabeth said that her mother raised her the way that way, and I raised my children that way. Yeah, yeah, very. There, more and more people are finding that they're going to find you're going to find more people that are going to be that will say that they were raised by a witch or were at least raised by someone who taught them some of the practices, and then they'll go on to continue and bring that to their own children. Okay, Melinda's asking about nightmares. What can I do to help my daughter ward off nightmares? I give her an amethyst crystal to sleep with. That's a good one. I cleanse her room regularly. I've also told her that her magic starts in her mind, and she can make the bad dreams stay away by saying, I believe I have good dreams. She's 7, and we're new pagans, so any advice would help. Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I think you're doing some great things. The amethyst is great. There is another stone that is called prehnite. It is spelled Prehnite. It's considered the stone to ward off nightmares, and it's considered like the stone of dreams and sleep. So I would find that one if you can find it. And what I do, I keep actually a piece of it under my pillow every night as well. You can put it in a little bag. There are some other, you can use like protective herbs too. If you've ever never made a sachet, you can take a piece of cloth and then you can fill it with some of those crystals and herbs of protection. Some other good protective stones would be obsidian or onyx, very good for protection. I like labradorite a lot for sleep. Some good herbs, I would say lavender is always a go-to for some protection. Some sage, those would be good ones as well. But yeah, then I would put it under the pillow. I think you're telling her the right thing. It does have to do with her, she does have the ability to kind of ward off those bad dreams by setting her own intentions in her mind. At 7, a lot of us I had terrible nightmares at 7 as well. So sometimes it's just par for the course. For me, I watched too many shows that were not like too scary, too not appropriate for a kid my age, like 6 or 7. So, one of the things too is I would ask her what is the content of those nightmares as well, because, we talk a lot about dream work for us as witches who are adults, but the dreams of the little ones, they also can tell a lot about what's going on in the psyche. And so if there's a particular theme that you see kind of running through her dreams, that can also guide you, as what to do next. But there's tends to be something when we're having recurrent nightmares. There tends to be something uneasy that we're dealing with. But I think I think you're doing a great job. You can ask any specific questions too if you're still here. Hope that helps. But I would try that prehnite stone is a very good one. Okay, Caleb said, can you please talk about how to connect with spirits and guides through the use of a pendulum as well? Yeah, so you can use your pendulum just like you could use automatic writing to connect to spirits and guides. What I would do is I would set out a very clear intention about who you want to talk about or talk with. And the only reason I say this is because I've done automatic writing for a very long time. I don't do a lot of pendulum work, but they can have a similar outcome when we're connecting to spirits and guides. And what will happen is when you're quite receptive to spirits, any spirit that's around wants to talk. And some of them actually are not going to offer I want to say that they're nefarious or anything, but they're not going to offer anything very productive for you. So sometimes when I have worked with them through automatic writing, it's just writing the same thing over and over again just because they want to talk. So one of the best pieces of advice is if you have a particular spirit guide that you want to talk to, I would see if I could even figure out its name. If you can talk to that spirit guide, what is your name, or kind of derive something through that and use that name and really set out an intention that I only want to talk to this spirit. And what that does is when you set out the intention, it's going to kind of block out the others that might be trying to get in there and get in the way. But you absolutely can use the pendulum. One thing I would do, just like with automatic writing, is you need to get into a pretty relaxed state. If you're already kind of tense, I wouldn't be doing that work. It's not going to be fruitful probably. So be very relaxed. Make sure you're quite grounded, and you are not sick, or having anxious thoughts or things like that. And then from there, set out the intention that I would like to connect to this particular guide, and then you can ask them, if they're here. And then you could do just like you would do with a regular pendulum, ask them to show you what no looks like on the pendulum, ask them to show you what yes looks like on the pendulum, and then begin to ask questions. But the pendulum is a very good way to be connecting with your spirits and guides. Lion, blessed be to you. Okay, let me see what else I got here. The comments jump on me every once in a while. I'll be reading one and then all of a sudden it jumps. Okay, so Elizabeth said, on Hereditary, it's hard to say which path. I seem to use all areas because it depends, so I'm not wrong in thinking this. No, absolutely not. So, as a hereditary witch, you can be drawing from all different kinds of places. Like any witch could draw from all different kinds of places. And so, like I said, I don't really consider myself any particular type, perhaps eclectic, maybe if I had to choose cosmic. But yeah, you are not wrong in your thinking. You can draw from all places. Okay, let me see what else we've got here. Yep, and because I feel like I'm always learning, even at my age. Yeah, at all ages, we're always learning. Angela said, what about someone who believes in energy rather than deity? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And somebody who believes in the energy rather than deities, you can call in the archetypes too. So you could call in archetypes, which are energetic aspects of the deities, without actually calling in the deities themselves. But if you want it to be completely separate, not even have anything connected to the deities, you can totally call in energy. You can call in the energy of nature. You can call in the energy of the elements. You can call in the energy of your chakras, your energy centers. I would say that probably still falls under secular witch, because the main point of that one is that you're not usually not calling the deities or having that religious aspect to it. Lion says, I'm a gray witch and love apothecary. Yeah. And then Stephanie said, automatic writing to connect with spirits and guides. Yes, you can absolutely use automatic writing to connect with your spirits and guides. I'm probably going to do an episode at some point on automatic writing. I've been doing it since I was in my early 20s. And through trial and error, I've gotten better, much better at it over the years. It was something that came to me very easily. So I see Caleb's asking advice on successful automatic writing tried without success. Yeah. So like I said, I'm going to do a full episode on it, but my short answer to that is relaxation. So one of the things is taking the dominant hand that you're going to write with, and you just have to get this hand as relaxed as possible. So this is why, same with a pendulum, you need to be very relaxed. So if there's like tension in the shoulder, you might even massage that out first in the arm. We just want this very relaxed. And then you kind of think about the arm just going like weightless, like almost like it's not mine. And this is where then you'll have the pen in your hand. And then you just kind of invite, I would set the intention of, I want a particular spirit guide of mine to come and converse with me. And then you just kind of wait. And some days it works. What I've found is that the hand will kind of start to move. And what I notice is it's a sensation that it's not me moving it. And this is where I know that there's a spirit here that's ready to talk. And then I would just get a bunch of paper, and then you just kind of go as relaxed as you can, close your eyes, and then just see what you can get out of it. But I will, like I said, I'll do a full episode on that eventually, because I have some tips and tricks that I can offer. But yeah, but that would be my first advice. Just try to get as relaxed as you can, and then just kind of invite your spirit guide to come in and communicate that way. Lion said, being a part of a coven, do you believe or follow the year and a day and degree system? Okay, good question. So in our own coven, when we initiate people in person, we typically, I don't know that I would say that it has to be a year and a day specifically. I think where that idea comes from is, first of all, before a witch really decides that they wanted to join a coven or pursue a certain path, I think where the idea comes from is it's important to see the entire wheel of the year. So that's where the year and the day comes from. Because what that means is that witch has observed the entire wheel, has seen all the seasons go by, has seen the different Sabbats, has felt the different energy as it's gone by. So I think that's one aspect of it. Second aspect of it is that when a person's ready to join a coven, these people shouldn't be just like brand new, in my opinion. So like in our own coven, if people would come to us and they want to join us, our in-person coven, we'll usually ask them or expect that they've had 6 months of some kind of self-study before they even begin taking classes with us or begin the initiation process. Mainly because some people find that they don't like it. They just, it's not for them. So there's a lot of people who kind of start and then they fall off. But if you require that kind of that self-study, what that means is that person starts to get to know themselves, starts to get to know what they're being drawn to in the path, and I think that's important. So we have sometimes had people kind of start our kind of 101 classes, and then I have tried to time it so they were in those classes for about a year before we would initiate them. From a solitary perspective, usually that person, I think all that year and the day means is just follow the wheel for a year and a day, so you can grasp what it means to be a witch for an entire year and see the whole wheel go by. Stephanie asked about initiation. So I'm not sure what you mean by your question, but we have so in a coven you would often be initiated in if you were going to become like a member of the outer or the inner court of that coven. But feel free to elaborate if there's more to that question. Okay, so people can continue putting questions in here. I am going to just jump over to a few that were sent to me, so I make sure I get to these too. So Felicia asked a question last week that I missed, and so I'm adding it tonight. So she said, how often does the energy of the Ida and Pingala move, and how long does it take the two to travel up and down the spine? So Felicia, she's been working with me in the Shadow Seekers membership, so she hears me talk about energy all the time. So for those who don't know about Ida and Pingala, I'm just going to briefly explain it, and then I'm going to answer her question. So the Ida and the Pingala are two energy channels of the body, and so there's three main energy channels of the body. There's the Sushumna, which goes up near the spine, so it's right the central column. And then on either side of it, we have the Ida and the Pingala, which is one is a feminine energy channel, that's the Ida, and the Pingala is a masculine energy channel. And these have nothing to do with gender. These are just the ways we describe these types of energies. And so they will interweave around that central column. And all of these energy channels connect at the third eye and at the root chakra. So her question is, how long does it take for that energy to move up and down the spine? So I had never, before I saw her question, I had never heard that there was like a specific time frame that it took for the energies to move. And so I did some research just in case it was something I had missed, and I still wasn't able to find anything about that. So I'm going to answer kind of the rest of the question. So one of the things is these energies are constantly moving, and it's thought that there is a dominant channel of energy that switches back and forth every 90 minutes. So what that means is that your Ida, the feminine energy channel, will kind of be dominant for about 90 minutes, and then that will switch over to the Pingala, the masculine energy channel, and then that will be dominant for 90 minutes, and they just keep going back and forth all day long. So one way you can test this is you basically close off one nostril and breathe. So just breathe through your left nostril, and you just see how that feels. And then you close off the left nostril and you breathe out of the right nostril, and you see how that feels. Now, what I notice when I do that is my left nostril is much more open, and that's an indication that the Ida, the feminine energy channel, is dominant for me right now. Now, if I check that in another 90 minutes, I'm probably going to find that my right nostril is more open at that point. Now, if you have terrible allergies like me, Sometimes the test doesn't work and they're both clogged up. But for most people, they should be able to do that test, and that will tell them which energy channel is more open right then. So if you want to bring in more of one energy, so let's say, for example, the masculine energy channel, which is more like projective, it's more active. Let's say it's the one that's dominant at that point, but you need to calm down because you're too anxious. What you can do is you could just close off the right nostril and for several minutes just breathe in and out of the left nostril. What this does is it brings down the energy and it helps switch your dominant energy channel over to the Ida, the feminine channel, which is the more receptive one and the more calming one. Now, on the other hand, if you're falling asleep at work or class and you need a pick me up, what you can do is you can close off the left nostril, breathe in and out of the right nostril. And what that will do is it will begin to move your energy into the Pingala, which is the masculine channel, the more active one, and it will kind of change the dominance there. So that is my best answer for her question about, kind of the Ida and the Pingala. Now, the other thing is that you have the Sushumna, which is the central energy channel. Energy's always moving through it. And it's moving through all of your chakras, and energy's always moving all day long. But it's sometimes kind of sluggish depending if there's blockages in any particular chakra. And your energy can also be intentionally directed through the Sushumna or the central energy channel. And in more advanced witchcraft or people who are kind of learning how to really channel energy for spell work, they will learn how to intentionally direct that through specific energy centers, hold it. There's actually ways to lock parts of your body so the energy won't fall back down, and you can hold it in certain places and then project it out. So, but that's my answer of how energy kind of is moving through those three main channels. And then I see Stephanie had said solitary Celtic pagan never had to be initiated. Yeah, many people never have to be initiated. So if a person is not solitary and they're in a coven, then they would be initiated. But yes, there are way more people who are not initiated than are initiated, and there's no right or wrong to any of it. Okay, so next question is from Rose, and she was asking about the best way to start with herbalism. And then I had asked her if she was interested in magical or medicinal, and she said medicinal. So here's what I want to say about this one. I'm not an expert on medicinal herbalism, and I recommend that anybody who wants to study medicinal herbalism, take a class or get some very good books. And I'm going to give some recommendations here. And here's why I say this. Because I've studied herbalism for 20 some years. It was one of the first things I kind of came across on my path. I studied magical herbalism first. I delved into medicinal herbalism. I know a lot. I've taken a class. I have some small certification in kind of medicinal herbalism, nothing extensive at all. But what I found is even for somebody who knows a lot about herbs, you can get in some trouble with herbs because I had a very well-meaning person tell me about a certain herbal concoction to make, and it screwed up my hormones so bad that I needed some very expensive doctors to help me. So why I say this is that when we're starting to work out with medicinal herbs, since many of those things are meant to be taken internally, especially if they're meant to be taken internally. We just want to make sure that you do a lot of studying and that you're well versed in it. So let me give a couple of suggestions for anybody, for Rose and anybody who's interested in medicinal herbalism. Julie James is a woman who runs a school called the Green Wisdom School of Herbal Studies. It's here in Southern California, but I would Google it, Julie James, Green Wisdom School of Herbal Studies, and she may still have some online courses. I know that she had some stuff going on during the pandemic. I have two very good friends who have trained with her. They're getting certifications through her. She's an incredible teacher. So I'd look into her. And you can take an introductory class from someone, and then after, if you're really into it, you can go and get like a full-on certification like my friends did. Now, Rosemary Gladstar is another great author. This is a book that she has. It's called Rosemary Gladstar's Herbal Remedies or Herbal Recipes for Vibrant Health. It goes into all different kinds of problems that people might have and has tons of recipes. So I love this book. She is a great author to be diving into if you're into medicinal herbalism. And she also has a book called The Herbal Healing for Women, and then she has a book called Medicinal Herbs, A Comprehensive Guide. So I would look into either her or Julie James. And if you're into magical herbalism, I feel like you have to use a little less caution with it because you're not taking any of this internally. You're working with the energies of the plants. Scott Cunningham, hands down to me, one of the best out there. Passed away several years ago, Crossed Through the Veils. His book is one of the most classic texts on magical herbalism, so I highly recommend this book. It's one of the first books I ever bought on my path if you're into magical. So that is my best answer for anybody who's hoping to dive down that magical or medicinal herbal pathway. Okay, so Stephanie asked me about her third eye. So she said, I've been working on my third eye. I've been able to perceive things, and I had it shut so tight for so long, but it's starting to wake up, and now it needs more energy to open wide. Okay, so I hear this a lot. So few things to mention here. So kind of going back to what I said about the 3 energy channels. The first chakra, the root chakra, and the 6th chakra, the third eye, they connect. They are the two places where the Ida and the Pingala and the Sushumna all come together. So in our body, those are the only 2 places where those 3 energy channels come together. So what that means is energetically, there's a deep connection between the root and the third eye. So when people say to me, my third eye is opening up, I'm perceiving things, but I need to work on it. I know I need to do more, to get it online and get it operating optimally. I tell them to ground down first. Really work with your grounding. Really focus on that root chakra. It's kind of like the analogy of the tree. It's going to put its roots down into the soil before it's ever going to lift up. And so working with the root chakra, even though it seems like it's got nothing to do with our intuition or our third eye, it has everything to do with it. So that would be my first thought is really work on your grounding, look into grounding practices, kind of consider how grounded you are, and before you're going to do any intuitive work, make sure you ground first. The other thing is that anybody who is clairsentient, that tends to come from the root chakra anyway, root and sacral chakra, because it's all about how we feel energy. So working with the root will help that too. Now, the other thing with somebody who specifically wants to work with the third eye, I would recommend yogic eye exercises. I have a whole video on working with the third eye. I'm going to drop the link below here when I'm off of the live, and you can check that out later. And it shows some of these yogic eye exercises, but you can also Google those. They're pretty simple. It's just essentially looking in different directions over and over, kind of looking up and down and around, and it gets the eyes stimulated, which also will stimulate the internal third eye. There's also intuition exercises you can do to kind of practice, like with a deck of cards, for example, try to find the star. See how long it takes you to find the star from the deck, or try to find something specific from the deck. You can also do candle gazing. Candle gazing is where you stare at the candle flame for several minutes and try to really get into a meditative state. This is known to stimulate the pineal gland, which is connected to the third eye. Some people find that it also has the benefit of helping them sleep because it helps the body produce more melatonin, but it is known to help us, open up that third eye a little bit wider. And then the other thing to do would be to consider some shadow work, because anybody who wants to work with their intuition will often find that there were emotional or energetic blockages in the body that they can discover through shadow work, and then once those are cleared, then they find that their intuition opens up. So I tell this story a lot, but in my own shadow work journey, when I started doing that work, it was to heal myself after an ectopic pregnancy, and I nearly died during that. And so I came to this shadow work path just to heal myself, and I was blown away by how much my intuition opened up as I started to clear out all of those blockages. So that would be my best advice for working with the third eye and really opening it up more. Okay, Tanessa asked me a question about the god Hypnos, and she said it's a strange question, which Tanessa, I didn't find this strange. It's about a deity. So I like your question a lot. She said Hypnos is a lower level god, but god of sleep. So I'm thinking about trying to work with him. Any advice? Okay, so Hypnos is an early god of the Greek pantheons. So he is considered a daemon, which is why I think you were saying he was a lower god. Sometimes people will just call him like a lesser god. It just simply means that he's not elevated on par with some of the other deities, like the Olympian gods or something. So now Hypnos was born to the Greek goddess Nyx. She is also a deity of night and of sleep. She was his mother. Different texts will say he has different fathers. Sometimes they won't even list a father for him. He's considered a very benevolent god. He helps mortals sleep. And like any other deity, what I would recommend you do if you want to work with him, and this goes for any deity you want to work with, find out as much as you can about that deity. So read about their myths, really start to understand those myths. Read about the poetry. So sometimes, especially with the Greek gods, that many of those Greek poets were writing gorgeous poems about these gods. And you can find those poems and you can recite them. And that can be a way to call that deity's energy to you, like an evocation. You also might want to figure out what kind of offerings Hypnos likes, or any god likes. In the case of Hypnos, one of his symbols is the poppy plant. So poppy seeds would be a fantastic offering, but I also have found people say that he loves chocolate. So that would be another offering you could leave. You could build a small altar in your bedroom, even if it's just on your night table, and leave a little offering to him, and then just send out that intention to have him kind of bless you with some peaceful sleep. But that would be my best advice. Kind of figure out, more about him, how you want to work with him. Consider building a little altar, leaving some offerings. But I think it's a great deity to work with for anybody who's struggling with sleep and wants to be blessed with some better sleep. Okay, and then Jen asked me about the triple goddess. So she said, can you briefly explain the three aspects of the triple goddess and how it relates to witches? So the triple goddess is the mother, maiden, and crone, and it is considered a deity or a deity archetype, depending on who you talk to. It is often found in traditional witchcraft and Wicca. It honestly just pervades neo-paganism today. It's pretty common for people to talk about it. So it's three aspects united as one. It's one of those things that it contradicts itself. How can one also be three? But it's one of those contradictions that we as witches, we don't have to trouble ourselves with, because we know that there can be two different realities, even if they seem to contradict one another. Now, the three aspects are usually connected to the female menstrual cycle. So it would be, so we have maiden basically is the beginning of the cycle. Mother would be like ovulation. This is when you're ripe and fertile, right? And then the crone aspect would be the after ovulation leading up to a period. So this is one way of looking at the triple goddess. Another way is looking at the phases of the moon. So the maiden in the waxing moon, the mother at the full moon, and the crone at the dark moon. Or the waning moon. Now, Robert Graves wrote a book called The White Goddess somewhere in the mid-50s, I think. I'll preface this with it's a difficult book for some people to read, very dense, but the concept of the triple goddess that we know in neo-paganism is really thought to be heavily influenced by Graves' writing. So a lot of these other writers that you'll see later, they may or may not give him credit, but a lot of them read Robert Graves' book, The White Goddess, and used that to kind of define their concepts of the triple goddess. Now, if you look throughout cultures and history, there's triumvirates of deity all over the place. We see this in the Tridevi of Hinduism. So we have Sarasvati, Lakshmi, and Kali. We see this in the graces and the fates of Greek. We see this in the Christian Trinity. There's three that is one. We see this, like Robert Graves said, we see this in the early Greek goddesses. So, for example, early Greek writers, which going into hundreds of years back in BC, they talked about Hecate. Sometimes they would say Diana or Selene, and then Persephone or sometimes Artemis. And so Hecate was usually considered the crone aspect, at least when we were talking about it that way. And then Diana, Selene would be the mother aspect. And then they would often call Persephone or Artemis the lesser goddess, And that didn't mean like not, it didn't mean anything that she was like below them. It just simply meant that she was like the younger phase of it, so like the maiden aspect. Now, we see the triple goddess in the Morrigan as well. Now, from the neo-pagan perspective of that mother maiden mother crone, the Morrigan, depending on who you read or you talk to, she doesn't really fit that category. She's usually referred to the three sisters who, as far as I know, didn't really have a difference in age and may not actually fit into that mother maiden crone. But she is a triple goddess in her own right, and many people will talk about that, those three aspects of her. Breed is another goddess that that falls into that triple goddess form. So you can work with the triple goddess like in her as the concept of the triple goddess. So you could call in, like when you call in Breed, you could call her in with all three aspects, or you could pick one specific aspect. Or suppose you're calling in Hecate, you're calling in that crone aspect, or you could call in the triple goddess. You could be calling in Hecate, Selene, and Artemis. So it's pretty much, you can think of it that way, like you can call that energy in, or it's also just a way that you can divide up all the various goddesses can usually be classified into one of those three aspects, even if they themselves are not part of a triple goddess within their own cultures. But in neo-paganism, we would probably look at certain goddesses and say, well, that one seems like, so for example, like, well, Lakshmi is a part of a triumvirate. She's part of the Tridevi, but she would be considered like the mother. But let's think about like Yemaya, for example. So she's not part of any triple goddess group that I know of in the Yoruban culture, but she would be considered probably a mother goddess because she's usually called on like as the goddess of the sea, a fertility goddess, things like that. So hopefully that answered your question, but if there's more that you want to know, just let me know. Let me see if there's anything else here in the comments. Okay, let me see. Sorry, I'm just seeing if... Yeah, Lion had said always research the herbs and effects they have with other herbs. Absolutely, yeah. Especially if you're going to take in anything internally, always be researching herbs. Yeah. And then Elizabeth said there's a book called Indian Herbalism available. Yeah, Indian herbs are different, but yeah, I'll have to check out that book too. I've been studying Ayurveda for a while. Caleb said, can you talk about ways of drawing in energy? I learned something called the star position and wonder what way you would suggest. By the star position, I'm not sure what you mean, but one way that you can pull an energy pretty easily is drawing it in through your root chakra. So drawing it in through any part of the body that's touching the ground. So if you're standing, your feet; if you're sitting, your seat; if you're lying down, your back, and you begin to draw that energy up and bring it into the root. The root is where we store the majority of our dormant energy anyway. And so as we bring it into the body, and in traditional Chinese medicine, they talk about this too, bringing the energy in through the root, or bring it in through, the earth up into the root, and then beginning to pull it up closer up to the top of the head, which is where I usually feel like you can project it out. Some people will project it out from the heart. The star position, I'm not familiar with, though you might mean like raising the arms up and then drawing it in. You can also draw in like cosmic energy or sky energy that way too, which would be different than drawing in the earth energy. Okay, and then Stephanie said, can you talk about offerings when it's a food or drink? How should it be disposed of? Yeah, we talked about this a couple of times before because it's a question I get asked a lot. So as far as offerings, I suggest that because it's food that has been given to a god and it's assumed to have been consumed in the etheric plane, even though we don't see that evidence in the physical world, I would put it in more of a place of reverence than throwing it in the trash. So what I usually do is I take it outside and I have like a fairy tree here and I leave it for the nature spirits. But if it's some kind of food, like let's say it was herbs that might have been poisonous to like the critters outside, what you can do is you can bury those underground too, so that they won't, no animal would eat them if it's something that they shouldn't be eating. But there are other people who will say it's fine to throw it out in the trash. It's just never been practice that I've done. I usually want to do it with something more reverent. And then Lion was saying bearing offerings. Yeah, bearing offerings is very, very common. Yeah. And then Caleb was saying the star is for cosmic energy. Yeah, so what you would do is it would be different. You would be drawing in the energy from above. And again, I would intentionally move it, bring it from up above down into your body, and then you can center it somewhere. So some people will bring it into the heart, some people will bring it down into the solar plexus. And then from there, you kind of decide what you want to do with it because you can then project it out. You could charge an item with it. So it's got a similar idea with the earth energy. It's just coming from the sky or the cosmos. Okay, so I'm over time, so I'm going to end here. I just wanted to let people know, though, very quickly about next week is going to be a special episode. So I'm going to be doing a full-length class on Zoom in this time space. And so look for a Zoom link inside our Body, Mind, Witchcraft group. And if you're on my email list, then you will also receive that too. And so this is going to invite you in to our Zoom so you can come live to this class. I'm going to be talking about chakras and shadow work together and how you work to pair energy work and shadow work together and how that actually can kind of accelerate the process. So we'll be exploring all of that next week. And then after that, our membership, Shadow Seekers, will be open for a week for anybody who wants to join us. So just look for some information coming in the next couple of days about all of that. And if I missed any questions here, I'll go back later and look for any I missed. And feel free to add any here too. And I'll go back in and answer anything you've got. All right, until next time, blessed be.